The problem with most budget mountain bikes is that they're trying to serve a specific target customer. One who wants to be able to ride a bike on some dirt trails, but also wants a versatile bike that can cruise around on paved roads and still be somewhat efficient. They'll mostly come with cross-country inspired geometry, meaning that the head tube angle will be relatively steep and the frame will have a really short reach. They might have a 100mm suspension fork, and while most will have disc brakes, they're usually cheap brakes with minimal stopping power and a pretty vague lever feel. But what if you're not this target customer? And what if you're legitimately interested in getting into the sport of mountain biking and you want a bike that's capable of hitting some actual MTB trails right out of the box? In this video, we're taking a close look at the Poseidon Norton hardtail mountain bike, and we'll discuss all the things that set this bike apart from the others in the budget MTB space. So for starters, this bike was designed by Eric from the Spindat channel, and if you follow his videos at all, you know that he knows a thing or two about bikes. Now, the whole concept of this bike was to develop a true trail-worthy mountain bike at an entry-level price point, which is something that surprisingly few companies are doing. So for starters, this is an alloy frame and it's based around a 27.5-inch wheel. Now, I know this is going to raise some eyebrows since most bikes have actually adopted the 29-inch wheel, but this is a trail bike and it's meant to be poppy and nimble, so a 27.5-inch wheel actually makes a lot of sense in this application. Now, one of the best things about this bike is that the geometry is right there in line with modern trail bike standards, with a slack 65-degree head tube angle, long 647mm reach, steep 75-degree seat tube angle, and short 427mm chain stays. The trail figure on this bike is 112mm, which of course makes for a nice stable descender. The frame and the fork also adopt modern boost spacing, which means that eventually, if you want to upgrade the wheels, it's really straightforward and you'll have lots of options to choose from. The bottom bracket is a standard 73mm threaded shell, and the frame employs a modern tapered head tube as well. The stock fork has 130mm of travel with lockout, and the wheels are secured with through axles front and rear. The frame also has internally routed cables for a nice clean look, and is dropper post ready for when you decide to install one. The drivetrain is the uber solid Microshift Advent X drivetrain with a 32-tooth chainring up front and an 11 to 48-tooth 10-speed cassette in the back. Honestly, this is probably the best budget drivetrain you can buy right now. I've even got this exact same Advent X setup on my Kona Hanzo, and it works great. Now, the brakes address the typically cheap mechanical disc brakes found on most budget bikes, and instead on the Norton you get the cable actuated hydraulic Juntech disc brakes, which feel so much better than a cheapo cable disc brake. Now, the whole bike comes in at 34.5 pounds in a size medium, which is heavy. More on that in just a minute, but it's just, I don't know, I would call it very close to a perfect budget hardtail mountain bike. It's ready to go right out of the box, but it's also a great canvas for personalizing it, and you can be sure that any upgrades you do make for this bike will be widely available and in most cases affordable. It was right at home on our local loop, and I had no issues pushing the bike to my personal limits, meaning that I didn't feel like the bike really held me back to any significant degree. Now, despite its hefty stock weight, it actually climbs pretty decently, but the descents are where the Norton really shines. It's nice and stable at speed, yet it's pretty flickable due to the smaller wheels and the short chainstays. Basically, the Norton is a very capable trail bike designed for budget-conscious riders who don't want to sacrifice on key parameters like modern geometry and modern accommodations. It does, however, have to cut costs somewhere, and that was the name of the game when designing this bike. After talking to Eric from Spindat for a solid hour on the live stream on the design of this bike, there was one theme that kept coming up, and that was finding a balance of component spec to price, which truthfully is a challenge for any bike company, but even more so when you're trying to keep the price of a complete bike to under $1,000. I mean, anyone can spec a high-end bike if money's no object. The challenge, of course, is speccing a bike with decent parts while keeping the cost low. Now, obviously, this is not a light bike, but a large chunk of the weight comes from the stock fork. Now, the stock SR Suntour fork actually works pretty well. It's not nearly as pogo-y as I expected it to be, and while it doesn't have a damping adjustment, the fixed damper does a decently good job of controlling rebound. However, it's just heavy. I mean, it is a tank of a fork. Now, the wheel and tire combo is also pretty heavy, which is actually pretty normal on a stock bike, but paired with this really heavy fork, it really makes the whole bike feel much heavier than it needs to be. Now, I'd really like to do an upgrade series on the Norton at some point, but I'd estimate that you could easily drop $5 to maybe 7 pounds from the bike by upgrading the forks and the wheels alone. And that's not even going super high end. I'd say something like a secondhand RockShox Revelation or a mid-range Fox 34 and maybe a set of Hunt Trail wide wheels would set you back maybe $600 or $700, but you'd probably easily drop 5 pounds from the bike, which would definitely make a substantial change to the ride feel. And again, these are costs that you could distribute over the course of a couple of years and easily transfer to other bikes if you ever need to. Now, the other cost-saving measure, which was an intentional choice, was to provide dropper post routing in the frame, but not to provide a dropper post. Now, unfortunately, you will need to supply your own dropper post, and by today's MTB standards, a dropper post is almost a prerequisite component. But thankfully, again, you can easily source a budget dropper like the Trans X Skyline post or the PNW Rainier post for under $100 new, or maybe even score a used dropper for less. So yes, there is definitely room for improvement, but like I said, the frame geometry and all of the modern accommodations are really where the value is in this bike. It strikes a great balance where it's perfectly rideable out of the box, but it's an easily upgradable platform, and it's really competitively priced. Now in the bike world, it's always strong, light, cheap, pick two. And in this case, it's very apparent that you're getting strong and cheap, but the bike was designed to be made light for not a ton of effort or additional cash, and that's pretty cool. Okay, well that's gonna do it for this one. If you have any questions about the Norton or my experience riding the Norton, just let us know down in the comments and we'll do our best to get back to you. Thanks again for watching, and thanks for subscribing to the channel if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time.